Good morning. Time for us to begin. We certainly good to see everyone this morning on this kind of different day. Hopefully that temperature is not going to drop down enough that it's going to cause us a problem. But anyway, it's glad that you're here. And those that are coming our way this morning will be by Facebook or YouTube. We welcome you also. Before we begin our class, we'll ask Brother Foy if he will direct our minds in a prayer.
Our righteous Father in heaven, we are thankful to you for this beautiful Lord's Day and for the privilege that we have to assemble here to worship you. We ask you, Father, to forgive us of our sins, that our worship and service to you today might be acceptable. We are so thankful, Father, for your word. We pray that you will strengthen our faith and help us to live according to your will all the rest of the days of our lives. Be with our leaders of this country, both nationally and internationally and locally, that they might rule in a way that we would be able to continue to worship you as we do this day. Be with us, Father, in the study of your word. Help us to lay it up in our hearts that we might not sin against you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
We're talking about physical death, and it's something that's definitely hard for most of us to think about. And we'll just look briefly at, we missed last Sunday, but to get back to where we are, we're studying Troubled Over Death. And one of the things that we looked at was we need to think about is just all things that live are going to die. That's something that's certain. It's going to happen to all of us. And of course, we're different than the beast of the field and so forth. We all have breath of air of life, but we have a different spirit in the animal kingdom, and we have a soul and a spirit that will live on in eternity. And also, we talked about that when we die, that it disconnects us from anything having to do anything earthly. We're conscious in death, but yet we do not have any connection with anything or any of the affairs that's going on in this world. And we also realize that when we die, that our body returns to dust from which it came, and our soul will go back to God. And certainly we talked about that some harmful views of false ideas about death, and one of them was that, it was his time to go, for instance, and that would actually take away from free will that God has given us. We do have a free will, and the choices that we make in this life certainly sometimes can extend our life some, and also it can shorten our life. And so we realize that God, if they say it's just God's will, and really when they look at it that way, it's more or less blaming God, that he just picks a time and we die. But that's not it. A lot of times God allows things to happen. He sets up a process, and things come about by that process. So today we've gotten to the point that we're in our lesson book up to page 34 on lesson 6, and we're going to try to finish lesson 6 and 7. I said we'd begin with it. We'd look at these two lessons as one lesson that just took 2 weeks. And so we're on lesson 34, begin looking at what we learned at a funeral, or what funerals teach us. Funerals teach us a lot. And we read in Ecclesiastes 7:2, it tells us, better to go to the house of mourning than to the house of feasting, for that is the end of all men, and all the living will take it to heart. The house of mourning it just connects us with God. We want a preacher at the funeral. Folks who never go to church still want a preacher at the funeral. Folks that never read the Bible want the Bible read at funerals. And we want prayers at funerals. I went to one funeral, though, that they played Travis Tritt country music. And the person there that did the funeral, he got up, and it was a person that had never obeyed the gospel. And he said, y'all all know this person, and we know this person. And so he said, I'm not going to get up here and talk about something that's not true. And he just preached a gospel sermon. But still, people want something spiritual at their wedding. These folks that never give thought to anything spiritual will maybe think about spiritual things at a wedding or at a funeral. And I've noticed too that go visit sick people that never seem to have anything for God, but they'll say, pray for me. And it's all of a sudden they seem to think that that's going to solve everything. It's interesting that people that, like I say, that never thought about God, they don't want a bartender coming up and speaking. They don't want the sports page read. They want something spiritual to connect them with God that they never had any thought whatsoever about when they were walking about their everyday life, But evidently they think that this is going to get them into heaven. And they evidently begin to think about there's something besides just going to the cemetery. But what the House of Mourning teaches us is that we can walk away from a funeral with a heart that can change us and make us better people. Make us think about things that we don't normally think about each and every day. But our day is going to come. And is my age and studying these lessons, it makes me realize that our days is not too far off, and they're very short, and we're going to talk about that. But the thing about a funeral, though it can change a lot of things, it can cause us to think about a lot of things. Nothing that the preacher can say, nothing anybody can pray, or nothing at that funeral can change our destination, because at that time, our destiny has been sealed. So we look at the brevity of life and the certainty of death are clearly evident at a funeral. And it's evident that life is short. James 4:14 tells us, for what is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Psalms 90:10 tells us, the days of our years are 70 and 10. And if by reason of strength they be 80 years, yet is their strength labor and sorrow, for it is soon cut off and we fly away. Now I think that the verse in Psalms 90:12 has a lot to teach us. It says, so teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. So thinking about numbering your days, what do you think it's talking about, number your days? Just anybody. Beg pardon? I think so. Make each day count and realize that they are numbered. We're to number our days as if the present one really is our last day. We can't boast of tomorrow. We don't know what a day is going to bring. But the sense is that God would teach us seriously to meditate on and consider the shortness of our days. And have you numbered your days? You know that we're told that it's 70, which is 70 years. Have you ever just taken your calculator out? Some of you probably can do it in your head. But how many days is 70 years? Well, I'll tell you, I happened to write that down. 25,550 days. That's how many 70 years is. Well, it just so happens that I'm presently 28,000 days. And so that makes me 2,450 days past 70 years. And some here past that. The Lord has blessed us by reason of strength or whatever, that we had those extra days. But it's still short. I sure thought it would take longer to get to where I am, but we're told that we number our days so that we can gain a heart of wisdom. We must live each day, no matter what our age, with the truth of the shortness of life. So in Luke 12:19, a rich man thought he had a lot of time left and he was going to just enjoy all the fruits of his labor and all. What did God call him? Called him a fool for him thinking that he had all these days left and he didn't think about God. He didn't think about anything but just the things of this earth. But, you know, there's just some things in this life that we can't count. And some in the stars, we can't count the stars. God can count the stars. We can't count the sand, but God can count the sand. But we can number our days. And what does that tell us? If we can number our days, that they're not endless, that there is an end to them. And so we need to keep that in mind. Yes, sir.
Or short.
Exactly. That's the thing. So many times I know that I'm so thankful that God is so forgiving that I've spoke at more than one funeral, and I spoke at one that where the person didn't obey the gospel till about 2 to 3 weeks before they passed away. But when you think about, you know, the 11th hour, and God does that. But really, I think about Timothy and about Lois and Eunice and the faith that he got from them, and about Moses, the faith that he got from his father. And of course, his dad had to be involved in that too because of the situation there. And so that's why it's so important. And that's getting off subject, I guess. Christians marry Christians and raise our children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord so that they'll have all these days that they can serve the Lord. And the main thing is we don't know when we're going to leave this earth. Is the main thing for that. So certainly there's actually 3 kind of days that we have. We're talking about our days. And one of these kind of days is that we have special days. We have that, you know, we have birthdays, and we have some kind of vacation, or we got together. We've had some special days just not too long ago, just recently. And we remember them. We take pictures, and we notice on Facebook all the people, they just remembered those days. And then we have these other days that we have funerals, and we have surgeries, things of that nature. I remember first surgery I had, and I never do like it. I'm immune to pain. But anyway, we have those days. But then we have just the regular days. We have just a day we get up and we go to work, and we go out and just come home, and we sit down and watch TV, and we do whatever. We just say they just those days are the most days that we have, and there's more of those than any others. And those are the ones that we have to be careful with, that we don't just let those days go by and just kind of get them to where we're just in a routine. We need to understand that those are the days, because there's so many of them, that we need to remember God and number those days and live for God each and every day. So true wisdom is what we're to gain from numbering our days. And true wisdom is a practice of godly living. And true wisdom is having the mind of a servant. True wisdom is thinking about others above ourselves. But most especially, true wisdom is to fear God and keep his commandments. What are some comments you have about life is short? Anybody?
I'd like to go back to what Roger said about young people. So often they do not think about their mortality. They just think they're going to live forever, evidently. And yet the scriptures warn about that. Or in Ecclesiastes chapter 11, the preacher said, "Rejoice, O man, in your youth, and let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these God will bring you into judgment." And then in chapter 12, at verse 1, he says, "Remember now your Creator in the days of your youth." A lot of young people just don't do that. And working with young people, thousands of them for scores of years, I've been to a lot of funerals of kids that we had at school. Many of them died of diseases, many of them killed in car wrecks and things of that nature. And, it's so strange how that affects kids, because for a day or two, everybody's just really upset. About the third day, we just have school again. And a lot of times, I think even those that have committed suicide think that the world's going to stop if they kill themselves. It's just going to change the world.
Yeah.
No, life's going to go on.
You know, I remember I never even thought about dying until, during those times we plan all this stuff, it's amazing how we make plans and all these arrangements for things that are not eternal, things that are just earthly. But yet for something that's eternal, we give less thought to that than we do all the other things that we plan and all, like our retirement and all this, like the farmer, we plan on all of that. But main thing is we need to be thinking about what's eternal, which is our soul. Does anybody else have a comment there? Very good, Frank.
I thought more about dying than I had ever thought in my whole life. But as I got past that, and then I finally reached 80, I began to take less of dying and being thankful for everything I have.
I'm glad you brought it up, Brother Forey. I had a guy that asked me, I was teaching class at over on one of the things at TVA, and the guy asked me, he'd come in there and he's talking about he just moaning along and he couldn't hardly walk. I said, it's not that bad. He said, you get old as I am, you'll understand. I said, how old are you? And he said, I'm 62. I said, at that time, I said, I'm 75. He said, no, you're not. I said, I guess I am. He said, well, do you think more about dying? I said, sure, I do. I said, I certainly do. And I told him about 70. And I said, but let me tell you something. I said, you become it. God takes care of that. Is he, gives you all this assurance. He's the God of all comfort. And Christians, the problem with the world that they don't understand, if they don't have God, then they worry themselves about dying so much that it actually may increase or decrease their days. But as a Christian, we should understand that death is not the worst thing, not by a long shot. And certainly that we should live really rejoicing that we do have a home in heaven when we die. And I understand, and we talked about it, that there's very few of us that people say, do you want to die in the next 10 seconds? Paul desired to be with the Lord, but it was better if he stayed with those people. But anyway, most people say, yeah, I want to certainly be one of those that loves the appearing of the Lord. So a crown of life will be for me. But you just ask anybody today, say, do you want to die in the next 10 seconds? And you're not going to get too many hands to raise up. But yet we don't live in dread of it and shouldn't as Christians. We need to trust in God. And I understand a lot of times I get to thinking about that and I think, Lord, increase my faith, and we need to always ask for increased faith. But exactly. Very good.
This is all we have promise of, sort of measure it, is to make sure you use it full of, you use it to the fullest of what you're supposed to be doing. Redeem the time, because we're not promised tomorrow.
Exactly. I heard that verse was on the radio coming down here. He said they quoted that verse.
Is the word we have respect is to see. And it means to look very careful, to be very careful the way that you live.
Exactly. And certainly we do need to be careful. And we need to think each day. And I've tried it mornings each day that we should wake up and I know Frank mentioned once that in his prayers, he said, let the words of my mouth and meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. But also we should think, Lord, help us to live in the moment. Help us to live today and help us through this day to be the best that we can be. And just pray for each and every day would be a good prayer, I think, for us. But does anybody have anything else from that? Okay, what are some good things that funerals bring out in people? What are some things you see that are good things that funerals bring out in folks. Exactly. Makes you think spiritually, like say it makes you think about your own soul. Just, people come to visit you. Some cook meals for you. Some take care of chores that need tending to. Some take care of children, dogs, or whatever you have while you're taking care of business that needs to be taken care of. And one thing is that some are just there for you. And they don't have to say anything. They're just there for you. And it makes us draw nearer to God. But don't hate to bring this up, but unfortunately, don't we see funerals sometimes bring out the bad in folks?
The gospel plan of salvation, the only time they may ever hear funeral service.
And I firmly believe that somewhere in that funeral, especially Christians, the plan of salvation should be somewhere in there. I mean, that's just goes without saying, you would think, but it's not always true. But there's just so much good and it helps us to feel compassion for other people, and we can identify that we're going to be there. Most of us, we've all experienced some death somewhere in our families, so we can all identify with each other there. But sometimes it brings out the worst, and most of us have seen that. But we don't want to spend much time on this at all. I just want to bring out that. But we're in a heightened state during this particular time, and we living on emotions a little bit if we're not careful, not thinking of rational thinking. And when you get a lot of people thinking emotionally, there's a lot of bad things that can happen. And so it's just no surprise, that conflict can arise when people are thinking like that. And what is the common thing that causes conflict? Money and possessions. I had a cousin, they were twins. They the next to being the same, close as they can be to being the same person. They were always very close. My uncle and aunt died. They didn't speak to each other for 5 years over a spring and where it was located. And certainly those things should not be. They should be, it should be that family obeys the wishes of their parents, whatever they were. And that's the thing I want to talk to is funerals help us with our priorities. We see these things happen and we think, I don't want this to happen at my funeral, And so what do we do to that? So what are some things that you may want to take care of before you die and you're in a sound mental condition as much as you can be in? What are some things you need to take care of?
Took care of our funeral expenses and also a place to be buried, so the kids wouldn't have to deal with that. We had to do that, not that I begrudge it at all, but Mother had the plans, but she did not make the arrangements. And sometimes that's what you're at your most vulnerable point. You have to make all these decisions. And you're in a high emotional state anyway. So that's one thing that really would be a favor to your kids, is if you go ahead, if you can, go ahead and just have it planned out. 3 days, they sell them all the time. So we decided to do that. Just so our children would not have, there wouldn't be any squabbles. They know exactly what's to be done. So,
And that's a great gift to your children, or the ones that, or whoever's left, that you can have this for. My dad and mom gave us years before, I guess, a long time before, Dad knew they had history of dementia, and he died of Alzheimer's. But anyway, we had power of attorney a long time before they died. We had their house was ours. We paid the tax on it for 10 years, and also their bank accounts was them or us, not them and us. We could do anything with the financial stuff they had except borrow money on it. And so certainly when they become incapacitated, well, we just took over the stuff. We were paying the bills, all that. We didn't even probate the will. So we just it was all set there. And Dad may not have done a lot of things for me, but the things, for whatever may be done. But I know one thing, they had that set up just right. So when our children born, we had a will drawn up. We had a will drawn up that who we wanted to raise our children. And that's something that we need to take care of. That's not going to be done immediately at the funeral. That will be read after the funeral. But that's something a person needs to think of if you got young children. You think of that. And the other thing, you need to talk to the people that you want to raise them. Make sure they're Christians, that they'll be raised in nurture and admonition of the Lord. And that way they will have custody of the children. That won't have to go through the state laws. The state laws are not always like we would want them to be. But there's just some things like that needs to happen. So we went ahead and bought our headstone, and we have our cemetery lots. And if you come down Tennessee Street, headed east for the Florence Cemetery, up on the right, that road, the first thing that turns up, sitting right there on the side of the road, is Howard on that thing. And if you wanted to bring in perspective, I kind of kidded a little bit about that to start with. I called my son. I said, we've got some property down there on Tennessee Street. We did some improvement on it. So we went down there and we went up, and Trish Ann wanted the headstone that she wanted. And I said, okay, that's the way to get it. So we went and got it and had it set there. And so I didn't think any more about it. And so I went down there and I looked down on that thing and it says Raymond Dickey Howard, and had this date when I was born. Then there's this dash that's between there that we don't know what is. And that kind of brought it into perspective. I was going to take the little footstone things that says mom and dad and use them for bookends on the mantle, but I thought better because my daughter would have killed me. And so, but there's things that you do really, though. I mean, I just make a lot of that, but it's really something that they won't have to do. And it's things that we need to think about. And like I say, like brought up here about, Brother Roger brought up about Timothy. You want to get somebody that's like a Eunice and a Lois, and somebody that will raise them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And then also, sometime or another in there, you probably want to get a power of attorney sometimes later on. If you've got, older children that are age of responsibility, and they are responsible, that you can do that with, it will save a lot of problems. And another thing is, can you think of anything else? One thing is, establish a trust on your home. And those things are really nice if folks don't come along and take your property. And like I say, we talked about purchase your grave lots and headstone, make known the funeral home you prefer. I've got one that I wouldn't prefer because they lost obituary to put in the paper. They lost the music that I gave them, sent them CDs with a cappella music. They lost that. They did not have the Navy was supposed to be there because he was a veteran of World War II. They forgot to call them, and then they forgot to do all the paperwork. We had to go back during the time of the funeral and do some more. So I'm not going to name that one, but I wouldn't name them. So I've got the one I want to now to be for us. But the thing is, also, we need to think about that during our lifetime, and Tricia and I talked about it, but she didn't want to just sit down and do it. And I don't think you can just sit down and do that. I think it's a kind of a ongoing thing. Like if you're looking through pictures, for instance, think about, this is some pictures I'd like, they run them on the monitor sometimes. Think about that, just and get you a package over here. Start putting those things in there. Your eulogy. Just, you want to tell them you were a Girl Scout. You want to tell them that you were an Eagle Scout. You want to tell them that you did this or did that. And write your own eulogy to a certain degree. And who you want to read it. And who you want to preach your funeral. And just all sorts of things like that. And you kind of do those things as you go along. And there's things that you think about that nobody else would think about. And you think about just all sorts of things that, like cremation. I don't want to be cremated. That has a bad thought for me. But that's nothing in the Bible that condemns that. There were people cremated in the Bible. And we have examples of that. But what did cremation most of the time symbolize in the Bible? What did it symbolize with Nadab and Abihu? The prophets of Baal. It was bad stuff. But burial, you want to think about you being buried. What kind of funeral do you want? Because as Don pointed out, you're in an emotional state here, And you go up to the funeral home, and they've got all these caskets anywhere from $1,100, $1,200 to, I guess, $10,000 or $20,000. They've got them just to whatever. And that you're in that emotional state, and you don't want people to think that you didn't care for your loved one. But I mean, you know, it don't matter. I mean, they have got some caskets now that the people up in Lawrenceburg up there, Tennessee, it's Amish or whatever. Anyway, they got those things. They're beautiful. They're walnut, and they're very economical. But while you're in a sound, or I guess you'd say reasonably calm state of mind, tell this is how much I want. Just don't spend any more than this or that on the funeral. And do I want just a graveside or whatnot? All these things. It is just so much. And then immediately when somebody dies, there is so much that has to take place. And it just takes place just like that. And you're not ready for it. And you got to say, first you got to get a death certificate signed. You got to get somebody to come and transport the body. Then you got to know which funeral home to go to. All of those things, if we would think of those ahead of time, and we tell our children, here's this package, go in there and look at that. When anything happens, they'll know how to do this and do that. I don't think that we could probably cover everything. Do you? Can you think of anything else that just immediately that you're going to have to do? You're going to have to get somebody, if you got children or something over here, that you're going to have somebody to take care of the kids while we're taking care of this, and just all sorts of things. It just takes place all at once. So it's something that we really do need to give a lot of thought to. And I don't want to spend a whole lot more time on that because we're going to try to finish this latter part of the lesson here. But the thing too that we have to think about is that we hear that Hezekiah was sick. What happened when Hezekiah was sick? And then the prophet came to him. What did he tell him? Set your house in order. You will die. You shall not live. You will die. Hasn't God told us that already? Set your house in order. We will die. We will not live forever. So what does setting your house in order really mean? I think it does one thing like planning your funeral and so forth. Other thing is just, and I'm not talking about anything in particular. I mean, it just makes you think about, would you want dirty dishes in your sink when, whatever, you set your house in order? Is there anything in the house that you didn't want somebody to see? Because I'll tell you, when you die, all your stuff is going to be looked at. It's going to be, you just think about somebody coming there, we're private. We don't want anybody going through our stuff. We just make sure you ain't got stuff you don't want anybody going through. Set your house in order. But the main thing to do, setting your house in order, is spiritually. That is what God tells us to do, that we're to make our calling and election sure. So that's what we want to have set in order. Does anybody else have anything about funerals? I know I spent a lot more time on that than I really thought about, but see, I had a lot more pages of things on this right here that I could just went on forever with that. But we come to over to the second part, dealing with grief, with the death of a loved one. And I want to tell you something up close. I have no earthly idea, cannot even comprehend losing a child or a spouse. I know I have things that happen is, I know I've lost mom and dad, I've lost cousins, in-laws, and brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, nephews, but I've never lost a spouse or a child. And I talked to a guy that was a real dear friend of mine, and he told me, and he come down and worked for me when I had a grocery store one time, and he said that he had lost a spouse, and they're different. I mean, all this kind of stuff. But he said it wasn't anything like losing your spouse. He said it's just because you're one. You're actually one person. You became one, and you lose a spouse, and it's something. And a child. A child is a part of both of you, and together. And I cannot even comprehend. And there's people here that have lost a child. There's people here that have lost more than one wife. They've lost a husband. And I don't even attempt to think that I can comprehend how that you feel. It has to be so devastating, So the thing is that it's death is a harsh reality we all face, and as beings who have the ability to love, along with the ability to love comes a responsibility to grieve, and that responsibility must not be taken lightly. And C.S. Lewis said, "No one ever told me grief felt like fear." And like I say, I've lost a lot of people, but nothing like a child or a spouse. But I understand that the loss of loved one of any kind, what is a personal thing, and each one deals with it differently, and it affects each person differently. And but we understand the only way that people get through it, especially I don't understand how that people are not Christians don't get through with it, because 1 Corinthians tells us that God is the Father of compassion and the God of all comfort. In his mercy and love, God is eager to provide comfort to his children in any and all circumstances. Whatever the trial we face, our Heavenly Father knows what the situation is and offers comfort needed. And the fact that he is the God of all comfort, and all comfort ultimately comes from him, he's our source, of course, from peace and happiness. And certainly, we have to turn to God. But there is, from what I'm talking to people, I've seen that there was a certain way that it affects everybody in the same way to a certain degree. It's all different for different people, and some people go through the same stages maybe more than once. And that is, they call it a healing grief. And I've read a lot of articles and talked to some people that have experienced these things. And they say the first thing that probably common to grieving is denial. That you can't, and they say that's a good thing. I'm talking strictly out of what I've read and things. I haven't been there. They say that's a good thing because you have to have that time to let it sink in. It's just so sudden that it overpowers you. And it said that instead of becoming completely overwhelmed, if you can go through that period, it helps you for a little bit there. And so it says your body's natural mechanism saying, hey, there's only so much I can handle at once. And this is psychologists and people, I think, that wrote these particular things. And then there comes a feeling, they say that there's at least 5 steps, and some of them's got 7 or 8. Then they talk about there's a feeling of anger that comes up, and a common stage to think, why me? And that's not fair. Frank had a lesson on suffering, and he said, why does God let me suffer here, was one of the statements he had in there. And it's one of the reasons probably is, he says, because if we didn't have things come in our life, we would get too attached to this world. We're already so attached to it, it's unreal. But those things bring reality to us, and things happen. God doesn't just choose somebody to do suffering to. He did back when there was miracles and things that he did back in the Old Testament and some other times. But now then, there's a natural process you go through for that. And then there's depression, and that is a sickness. I mean, that's real, and that just is really a bad time. I understand. I've been around some people and had one in the family that was depressed, and I tell you, it really worked on them pretty bad. And then there's resentment that we see. You lose a spouse, and Brother Adams did a really good job of this thing. He lost a spouse, and he held a meeting with us, and we talked about that some while he was here. And he said, that you're not married anymore. You get left out. You're not included in a lot of things you were included before, and you may have somewhere down deep resentment that the other couples are still got their spouse and things of that nature. And then there comes the time of acceptance, and that's the time that really it's great importance to the rest of your life that you can come to the part of acceptance. And I personally, and I know, and I want to know people here to know one thing. I've talked to people, and I see people here that have sickness. I know some that's had terrible sickness their whole life, and they've just dealt with some terrible things with their health, and yet they've never lost their faith. And I know some here that had terrible things happen in loss of loved ones, and they've never lost their faith. And I want you to know one thing, what an example a person like that is, and encouragement to other people that what faith in God can do for a person. Because when I see some of the things that folks went through and they're able to go on, and folks say, well, I don't understand how they can do it. I do. Their faith in God and God taking care of them. It has to be that. Nothing else. No doctor, no psychologist, no whatever can make anybody get over some of the stuff that I know that's happened to some of you. And I want you to know I appreciate you so much in your example to others to how to handle stuff, and that's by having a great faith and staying true to God. But Brother Connie goes on, and he's very fortunate that he remarried, and he told us, he said, you don't never forget that first wife, or your wife or whatever. He said, but what you do, you just open another room in your heart for them, and that's what you have to do. You don't forget those people. And then two, he is very fortunate that he has children and grandchildren and step grandchildren and all, that some of them don't know any other grandfather or father or whatever, and particularly, and they all get along good. That doesn't always happen, because sometimes children resent a parent remarrying or something like that. But point being is that it's our faith. It's numbering our days. And the thing about it is, God's children, we're to act differently. We're to number our days, and especially, it's not how, that we'd have to live each and every day, just as was pointed out here, just one day at a time. And does anybody else have anything else on mind? I'm really in territory here that I've never been, and I told you that to start with. Does anybody have anything?
Lady in College View several years ago, she's dead now, but she had lost a child and lost her husband. And I don't know what prompted me to ask her. I said, which was worse, losing your child or your husband? And she immediately said, my husband. So that bond is one of the greatest bonds on earth, I think.
It is, and we're going to talk about that next week. We get to talk about divorce next week. And by the way, I want to mention to you too that pick up one of these things if you haven't had the lessons out here. It's on the table, and it will be lesson 8, which will be on divorce, and we'll be discussing that. And I don't know of really any family, particularly that hasn't one way or another, by somebody somewhere down the line in the family that hasn't been affected by divorce one way or the other. And certainly, the one thing that we do know about it, we know how God feels about it, don't we? How does he feel about it? He hates it. And but I appreciate all the comments that had this morning. That's the lesson. I had a whole lot more stuff here, but I think pretty well covered that. Anyway, that's a lesson. And yeah.
I think that some advice I was given years ago. I lost my dad, and he was 41, mom was 39, and I had just got married a few months, and when a fellow told me something that I've never forgotten, it's turned out to be true because I've seen the opposite of it. He said, don't make any major decisions within 1 year. After, just like mom regretted what she did. She got rid of everything that belonged to Daddy. His work truck, his scaffolding, he was a brick mason, got rid of a tractor. I mean, she just couldn't stand the sight of it being there. It was too painful. And I understand that. But she regretted that later on. And I've never forgotten what that fellow said, that, whether it comes to remarry, whether it comes to getting rid of things, just let it sit for a while.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Until your emotional compass gets back where it's close to where it used to be. And that was some real good advice. I never forgot that. And I've seen people really get in trouble because of that.
Yeah, that's really good. I should have brought that up, but thank you for bringing it up, Don. Do you make decisions when you're in that state of mind that you really regret later? And that's what they say. Don't make any financial decisions or anything like that. And just like Don said about giving stuff away and all that until you've had time to think about it and come back to kind of rational thinking. Thank you. Anybody else that will have anything for?